the call to duty.
I spent the night wrestling with my decision. Was I ready to step into a world of danger for a man like Karanja? His wealth and connections were legendary, but so was his reputation for being ruthless. Yet life hadn't been kind to me. My job as a part-time mechanic barely kept me afloat, and the promise of a reward glittered in the back of my mind like a distant star. As dawn broke, I made my choice.
The gathering.
The moment I stepped into Karanja's estate, I felt like I'd walked into a different world. His home was vast, with manicured gardens and walls adorned with African artwork. The air smelled of wealth lavender and freshly polished wood. Achieng caught my eye immediately. There was something striking about her quiet confidence. I'd met many strong women in my life, but Achieng was different. She had an air of mystery, as if her silence carried stories too heavy to share. When Karanja described the mission, I studied the others. Odongo looked skeptical, arms crossed over his chest. Wanjala seemed uneasy, shifting in his seat. Achieng's face remained unreadable, but her eyes darted to the map on the table, lingering on the desert's edge. "Why us?" I asked. Karanja's gaze lingered on me, "Because you're desperate enough to succeed."
Into the unknown.
The matatu ride to the desert's edge was anything but comfortable. Packed tightly with strangers and livestock, the heat became unbearable. Odongo, ever the loudmouth, tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but none of us laughed. Achieng sat beside me, staring out the window. "Have you ever been to the Chelbi Desert?" I asked, hoping to break the silence. She shook her head. "No, but my grandmother used to tell stories about it. She called it the land where spirits whisper." Her words lingered in my mind long after the matatu dropped us off at the edge of the desert.
The first signs of trouble.
The first 2 days were uneventful, though the heat and exhaustion tested us. On the third day, I noticed Wanjala falling behind. His usually calm demeanor had shifted, and he looked restless. At one point he whispered to me, "Do you believe in curses?" "Why do you ask?" He glanced at Achieng, then looked away. No reason, just wondering. That night, as the desert wind howled around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us.
Whispers in the night.
The growls began just after midnight. At first, we thought it was the wind playing tricks, but then we heard the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against sand. "Hyenas!" Odongo muttered, gripping his machete tightly. We huddled together, backed to the fire. The shadows danced around us, and the growls grew louder. Suddenly, a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. Then another and another. "Achieng!" Achieng was the first to act. She grabbed a burning stick from the fire and waved it at the creatures. The hyena snarled, but retreated into the night. Achieng didn't respond. Achieng stared into the darkness, her expression unreadable.
The ring's curse.
By the 5th day, the desert began to play tricks on us. The heat shimmered like water, and mirages danced on the horizon. Wanjala grew more withdrawn, muttering to himself. That night, as we rested under a crescent moon, he confided in me. "The ring, I've been dreaming about it. It's as if it's calling to me." "The dear, dreams don't mean anything," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed my own words. He shook his head. "You don't understand. It feels alive."
Bonds and fractures.
Despite the challenges, there were moments of connection. Odongo told us stories about his life as a fisherman, his laughter echoing in the stillness of the desert. Wanjala spoke of his students, his voice soft and nostalgic. Achieng shared little about herself, but when she did speak, her words carried weight. One night, she told us about her grandmother, a healer who believed in the power of objects to carry curses. "What about you?" she asked me. "What keeps you going?" I hesitated. "Survival," I said finally, "and maybe hope." "Ah? Oh, He smiled, a rare and genuine smile that stayed with me long after the fire had died down.
A deadly encounter.
The attack came without warning. A pack of wild dogs appeared on the horizon, their eyes gleaming with hunger. We barely had time to react before they charged. Odongo swung his machete, his movements swift and practiced. Achieng held her ground, using a sharpened stick to fend off the beasts. One of the dogs lunged at me, its teeth bared. I managed to grab a rock and smash it against its skull. The rest of the pack retreated, leaving us shaken and bloodied. "That was too close," Wanjala said, his voice trembling. "We need to be more careful," Achieng replied, her tone firm.
Secret revealed.
The abandoned hut was a welcome sight, but what we found inside chilled us to the bone. The map and journal told a story we weren't prepared for, a story of betrayal, greed, and death. Achieng read the journal aloud, her voice steady despite the grim content. "The ring is cursed. It brings death to those who wear it." Odongo scoffed. "Superstition, it's all it is." But I saw the fear in his eyes.
Betrayal.
Tensions reached a breaking point that night. Odongo accused Achieng of leading us into a trap, while Wanjala's paranoia deepened. "You knew about the curse," Odongo shouted, his voice echoing across the desert. "I suspected," Achieng admitted, her voice calm. "But I didn't know for sure." Their argument escalated until I stepped between them. "Enough," I shouted. "We need to stay united, or we'll never make it out of here alive."
Shadows of doubt.
As the days stretched into what felt like weeks, the desert began to erode our trust. The sun was relentless, baking our skin and our patience. The silence that once seemed peaceful now felt suffocating, broken only by the crunch of sand beneath our weary feet. Odongo had grown more volatile, his temper flaring at the smallest inconvenience. And Wanjala, on the other hand, seemed lost in his own thoughts, mumbling to himself about the cursed ring. Achieng he remained the calmest among us, but even she seemed more guarded, her gaze flicking suspiciously between Odongo and Wanjala whenever we stopped to rest. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the side in shades of red and gold, Odongo pulled me aside. "We can't trust her," he whispered, nodding to the fire. I frowned. "Who are you talking about?" "She knows too much about the ring," he continued, his voice low but urgent. "And she's too... calm! How can she be so composed in a place like this?" "Maybe because she's stronger than we are," I replied, irritation creeping into my voice. Odongo glared at me, but said nothing more. That night, I kept one eye open, the weight of his words settling uncomfortably in my chest.
The mirage.
By the 8th day, dehydration was no longer a distant threat, it was a reality. Our water supply had dwindled to a single flask, and every drop was rationed with excruciating care. The desert seemed to mock us, offering mirages of shimmering pools just beyond our reach. It was Wanjala who broke first. "I see it!" he cried, pointing toward the horizon. "Wanjala, stop!" Achieng called, but he was already running, his steps uneven in the shifting sand. Odongo and I chased after him, our legs heavy with exhaustion. When we caught up, Wanjala was kneeling in the sand, scooping handfuls of dry, sun-baked earth to his lips. "It's real," he muttered, his voice cracked and desperate. "I can taste it." I grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him. "It's not real, Wanjala. Look at me." His eyes were wild, his lips cracked and bleeding. For a moment I thought I'd lost him to the desert, but then his gaze focused and he slumped against me, sobbing. "We need to keep moving," Achieng said softly, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes.
The hidden oasis.
Just as hope began to slip through our fingers, we stumbled upon a hidden oasis, nestled between two rocky outcrops. The sight was so surreal that we hesitated, fearing another cruel mirage. But as we approached, the cool scent of water reached our noses, and the sound of a gentle trickle filled the air. We fell upon the oasis, like starving animals, drinking until our stomachs ached. The water was cool and sweet, reviving us in ways that food and rest could not. As night fell, we sat around a small fire. Our spirits lifted for the first time in days. Achieng spoke of her childhood, of nights spent listening to her grandmother's stories by the fire. She used to say that the desert tests not just your body, but your soul, she said. Her words just hung in the air. Strips away everything until you're left with the truth of who you are. Her words hung in the air, a sobering reminder of the journey still ahead.
The Watchers.
The peace of the oasis was short-lived. The next morning, as we prepared to leave, I noticed tracks in the sand, large, clawed prints that circled our campsite. "We're being watched," I said, my voice low. Odongo's grip tightened on his machete. "By what? Hyenas, maybe? Or something worse?" Achieng replied, her expression grim. We moved quickly. The sense of safety we'd felt at the oasis now went away. The desert seemed to close in around us, every shadow a potential threat.
The first loss.
It happened so suddenly that none of us had time to react. One moment, Wanjala was walking beside me, his head bowed against the sun. The next, he was on the ground, clutching his chest. "Wanjala!" Achieng cried, rushing to his side. His breathing was shallow, his face pale despite the heat. "The ring," he gasped. It's inside me." "What are you talking about?" I asked, kneeling beside him. But Wanjala only shook his head, his eyes glazed with terror. Moments later he was gone. We buried him in the sand, marking his grave with a pile of stones. As we stood there, the reality of our mission settled over us like a heavy shroud.
The desert's wrath.
The desert grew more unforgiving with each passing day. Sandstorms raged around us, forcing us to take shelter under whatever rocky outcroppings we could find. One night, as the wind howled like a living thing, Odongo turned to me. "Do you ever wonder if we'll make it out of here?" I didn't answer. I couldn't.
The truth.
It was Achieng who uncovered the truth about the ring. In a crumbling journal found in an abandoned hut, she read aloud the story of a man who had once possessed it. "The ring is cursed," she said, her voice trembling. "It brings death to those who wear it. The poison is slow, but it's inevitable." "Why didn't Uzve Karanja tell us?" I asked, anger bubbling in my chest. "Because he knew we wouldn't come if we knew the truth," she replied.
Betrayal.
Odongo's paranoia reached its peak that night. He accused Achieng of leading us into a trap, his voice loud and angry. "You knew about the curse. You've known all along," he shouted. "I didn't," she replied, her voice steady but strained. Their argument escalated until I stepped between them. "Enough!" I shouted. We need to stay united, or we'll never make it out of here alive.
The final test.
As we neared the end of our journey, the desert threw its final challenge at us. A vast chasm stretched before us, its edges crumbling and unstable. "We have to cross," Achieng said, her voice firm. It was a test of courage and trust, one that pushed us to our limits. But somehow we made it, our bodies battered, but our spirits unbroken.
The return.
When I finally stood before MZ Karanja, the ring in my hand, I felt nothing but emptiness. "You have done well," he said, reaching for the ring. I hesitated. "Do you even care about what we went through to bring this to you?" His gaze was cold. Care? No. "But I do appreciate your loyalty." As I walked away from his estate, I felt a strange sense of peace. The desert had tested me, broken me, and rebuilt me. And though I had lost much, I had also gained something I couldn't quite name. Perhaps, in the end, that was enough.
With every breath a fight, the desert holds its secrets in the shadow of the night. But the stars, they guide us, the winds they call.
And that is the end of this story.
In the silence, we rise through it all. Through the sands we carry on, with the fire of the rising dawn.